Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us right here on the ACM's Facebook Live. My name is Rishi Bajani, and I'm your host for today's session. If you've just joined us, this is, of course, this is a quarterly segment called Conversations, brought to you live from the Asian Civilizations Museum. And today we'll be talking a little bit about stories and storytellers. This is in line with the special exhibition that's going on at the ACM called Faith, Beauty, Love, and Hope. I'm going to introduce you to our panel very shortly. We have a very esteemed panel of storytellers with me. But before we do that, tell your friends, family members about this stream. Share it on your social media pages. It's 3 p.m. on a Friday in Singapore. So don't pretend that you're busy working in the office or at home. You know, I know that you've started to drop off the day. So make it more fun. You know, join me as I tell you a little bit about what's going to be happening right here live from the ACM. Also, if you would like to get involved in our discussion, what you can do is leave a comment down in the Facebook comments page, or you can scan the pigeonhole barcode that I'm going to be showing you throughout this opening right here. You can see that. Feel free, ask us a question, or leave a comment, leave a feedback, leave a story of your own if you've been to our exhibition, which we will tell you a little bit more about very shortly. All right, let me introduce you to our very, very esteemed panel. You have come late to our conversation, let me just be honest, right? If you can see everybody right here, we've been having a chat so far. I've got Shui, who is our curator right here at the ACM, specifically for the Chinese art.
Yes.
Okay, amazing, thank you. We've got Arvin from Apsara's Arts. We've got Desmond, who has vast experience in the writing field, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes, thank
you. You were watching me to see what I'm going to say about you, right?
Well done.
Desmond is like, how is Rishi going to introduce me? Yeah? We've got Kamini, who is probably the best way to describe you is a professional oral storyteller. Yes. I guess that's the way to
That's right.
do
Thanks.
this, yeah? And Malik Mazlan, our Chinese calligraphy creative.
Yes.
Okay, now this session is about stories and what they mean to all of us right here. It's very clear that everyone here comes from different disciplines, but we have something that connects us all. It's our love and our use of stories in our work. Maybe Malik, if you don't mind sharing with us first, how did you become involved in Chinese calligraphy?
My first understanding of calligraphy was actually Japanese, because I had my teacher actually was Japanese, and he taught me for a few years before I had to fly back to Japan.
Right.
So when he flew back, and then I was like, oh, I'm lost because I don't have a mentor. And it's like, oh, I'm in Singapore, So that's when I started sourcing out for mentors. So that's when Chinese calligraphy came in. So I thought it was the right move. So. But it was very difficult at first, because first of all, I was illiterate. I don't know any Mandarin.
Oh, you don't? You don't speak or write or read Mandarin?
At that time, no, I did not. So that made it more important to find a mentor to decode it for me. So then, I'm very lucky because he's still he's still my mentor till today.
Right.
Yeah.
And what do you think makes you a storyteller in this field?
I guess what makes me a storyteller in the field is like, I should say that every artwork or every time a calligrapher writes, his emotions are noted, or rather is recorded in the artwork, even though it's a one word, because the Chinese brush is engineered in a way that is very expressive. So you can actually see when a calligrapher is upset or what kind of mood he's in. So in a way, I guess you can describe a calligrapher as a storyteller.
I agree,
Yeah.
100%. I'm going to move from Chinese calligraphy to a very different world. Arvin, tell us a little bit about your work with the Apsara's Arts.
So Apsara's Arts is a Indian classical dance company. So in Indian classical, and I'm the artistic director of that company now. And so Indian classical dance is about storytelling. So it is a very flexible vocabulary that you could tell stories from mythology, from epic to contemporary stories as well. So it's very flexible in that way. And I think as an artist, as a creator of art, we are kind of responsible to also carry some of these stories to next generations as they come. So that is a kind of something in our shoulders, a responsibility that we owe to the craft, right? And telling the stories is interesting, but for me what has become the passion is to find common stories within our Southeast Asian neighbors. And there are a lot of stories which we share, a lot of stories that we can actually complement each other. So that's been our journey at Apsaras Arts, where we try to bring the Indian dance narratives and the Southeast Asian stories together and give that taste and give that experience to the audience, almost as if they went on a tour to these countries.
That's beautiful. It's beautifully put. And you mentioned something that I think everyone here is in agreement of. It's about passing down some stories of previous generations that maybe don't exist in other mediums at the moment. Like, for example, Kamini, you tell stories, like you sit down and tell people stories. Literally, you are probably the only one here who does that. I tell stories to people I tell stories to drunk people in bars sometimes who buy tickets without mincing my words. That's what I get paid for, okay? But how did you get to this world of oral storytelling?
So what you're trying to describe really is the genre of oral tradition. And in oral tradition, you will also have dance, you'll also have visual art and different types of forms. But mine would be the spoken word or the narrative. So my late maternal grandfather, he was a storyteller. And so being the eldest grandchild, I spent the longest number of years together with him and inherited his repertoire of a lot of the Indian mythology, legends and epics, as well as the story of that early diaspora of migrants who moved from South India to what we know in this region as Malaya. And so I'm a fourth generation descendant of that ancestry. And so it was very important that he passed on these tales that had fables, folklore, fairy tales, as well as true stories. And that's what I do. I practice orally. I share these stories with both children and adults, and maybe sometimes drunk people in bars too.
Hey, just saying that's pretty much my area, so please stick to your own audience.
Hey, but comic storytelling is also a wonderful and very old genre. Yeah.
It is. I mean, I think roots in being a jester
Yes.
are something that we have very little information about.
Correct, yeah.
I'm just very thankful that you can't make the king laugh today, you don't get your head chopped off, which is very useful in the modern world of comedy. We have someone actually from the ACM with us. Shuyi, you probably have the most experience working in this entire building, in this field, as the curator of a very specific segment of work here. How did you end up? Was this always the dream? Was it something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, as my mom would describe me, she always said I had an old soul. Yes, and just had an uncanny love for museums. She was always surprised why, as like even a 3-year-old, I just like sort of dark with more spooky places and was just enraptured. So, yeah, by just some stroke of luck or the stars aligning a day, I just happened to join the museum as a researcher first, and then over some time became a curator. So. Yep, that's sort of my backstory.
That is very beautiful. I think even we were having a conversation before the cameras were live earlier, a little bit about this exhibition, which hopefully you'll be telling us about in a short while, once we've got our audience coming in very shortly. I think more people. Yes, Desmond.
Yes.
Our literary storyteller. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yes.
You've worked in a wide variety of industries.
Yep.
You've told stories to, people who read a magazine you work for. You've told stories to students as well.
Yep.
And what is your favorite part of being a storyteller?
Just approaching each narrative through the lens of literary craft, right? So I work across different writing genres like poetry, fiction. I was a journalist a long time ago. Dad's a publisher, so the books have been a part of my life right through. And I just like the aesthetic demands of each writing genre and experimenting and innovating. and seeing where it goes. So a lot of theories are very fun, you know, to use to understand those narratives and give them a sort of breath of fresh air, something refreshing. Yeah.
And you feel like working with youths, again, bring back to the point that we were mentioning earlier about, you know, transferring some knowledge to the next generation. Do you
Yeah.
feel working with youths today is very different? I don't know, like what does Gen Z feel about the work that you've done in the past?
Yeah, I love talking to them and working with them because I learn a lot from them, right? You know, it's such it's a new worldview. There's so much energy. There's so much going on, and it's really a beautiful conversation that we're having. Yeah.
Do you think you're one of their favorite teachers?
I hope so.
You've got I wouldn't know of teacher Desmond. Is that how you're referred to?
No, Desmond.
Desmond, not Mr. Con.
Sadly, sometimes.
Oh man, that's good. No, I have a lot of okay, I'll be very honest. My first brush with actual storytelling was through teachers growing up, where I discovered being able to tell stories in front of people was that, you know. I had a teacher named Miss Lim Aber back in the day, and someone dared me to say her full name. You know, when you greet the teacher, you greet, "Good morning, Miss Lim." And someone said, "Why don't you say her full name?" You know, like Aber. And I was a 12-year-old kid looking for attention, and I went up and I said, "Good morning, Miss Lim Aber." And then everyone was unhappy. Everyone was really happy, but Miss Lim was not happy about it. So she asked me to come to the front of the class and tell everybody what's so funny. And that became my first ever stand-up comedy show, I'll say. When I was 12 years old, I told a class full of 12-year-olds what was so funny. That's how I got my start. I guess it's probably an interesting time right now just to get a little bit of info about this exhibition, Shui,
Okay.
if you don't mind sharing.
Yes.
Faith, Beauty, Love and Hope.
Yes.
Everyone's had a chance under your curation, actually, except me. I came here alone because I was an ill-disciplined child. But tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so this is our current special exhibition, and it's a bit different in the sense that instead of just hearing my voice, it's really a plurality of voices. And what we really wanted to have was also hearing not just voices of my colleagues, but also the wider community who, you know, make the museum tick. So we asked for stories from like student volunteers, our museum docents, even our security personnel. Yeah, so we wanted them because for me, really, the security may be the person who really spend the most time with the artifacts every day. And sometimes it's just nice to see them like just being contemplative in front of an object and so forth. So we thought that everyone has been looking at the museum, you know, through different eyes, and different objects would speak to them in different ways. So that's sort of essentially what this exhibition was about. And I think last year as well, I mean, this year continues probably to be, or at least at this moment, to be still rather challenging. Yeah, so we thought it would be a good time for people to come together to also, well, just spend some time and reflect. So actually, when I had the call out to the various participants, I said you can just be creative. If you had wanted to give me a voice recording, it's fine, and so forth. But I think many people actually chose to express themselves mostly in prose, but some in poetry as well. And yeah, so this is really how it came about. So it's about actually the stories of many people and also how they relate to objects. Yeah.
That's very interesting, actually. Speaking of the objects at this exhibition, everyone's so Malik, you had a chance to visit the exhibition.
Yes, I did.
In the group.
Yes.
You had a specific object that you connected with.
There was this brush rest, am I right? Yeah, with a Farsi or Iranian script in between. And it was actually a Chinese brush rest, and I was like, wow, this is very beautiful. And how it was actually it looks wholesome together. It's like two culture being together. And this is what I am trying to endeavor in all my creative pursuits, one of it.
That's interesting. So you connected with it because in a way it relates to your personal story as well.
Yes, personal story. I mean, like being a Malay, Arabic calligraphy is, or rather, this kind of calligraphy is always decorate in our homes. And then you have the Chinese mountains. I mean, when I saw it, like, oh, okay, I'm somewhat the object, something of what I'm trying Well,
Yeah,
I am, I guess.
Yeah, it reflects your,
Yeah.
and that's very interesting because I think a lot of things that we will realize, the stories and being able to connect with people
Yeah.
has a very personal space. Is that something you relate with as well, Arvind? For example, when you perform, it doesn't just come from, research or stories that you've heard from people. It comes from a fairly personal place as well.
Yeah, it's actually a personal discovery. Even though you may undertake a research to make the craft more wholesome, but the spark of that interest has to come from within. So rarely you can get a brief from a producer, and can you do something about it? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Always doesn't spark you.
You also had an object that you selected, and I think I was told that we were looking at a similar artifact or a similar object. You want to tell us a little bit about it? And I'll tell you my views as well at some point.
Okay, I think for me the object was the two Buddhas, one from Myanmar and one from Cambodia. As a child, I grew up in Sri Lanka, so Buddhism was surrounded as though I'm a Hindu, right? So you are embraced into Buddhism, and you see a lot of these statues. And then later, as I said, I'm inspired by Southeast Asian narratives. So one of the dance productions that has been toured widely that we created, it's called Anyasa, Unraveling the Buddhist Monuments of Asia. And it was interesting that we actually did two stories, one of the Myanmar Buddhism and the Yangon, the Shodagan monument in Yangon, and as well as the monuments in Cambodia. So you can see what it fascinates is that the ideology of that, Buddhism was born in India, but the ideology has traveled and it has become localized. So there was no cut, copy, paste that we are used to seeing nowadays. So it is very indigenous, and as much as they can claim that it's their Buddha.
It has evolved along the way.
Yeah, and they've had their local charm to it, and it becomes theirs, and that's very fascinating when you travel through Southeast Asia.
That's wonderful. I completely resonate with that, with very much less intellect and research. I'm not from the world. For example, when I am visiting and learning things at the ACM, I come from perhaps the most layman perspective. And when I saw this particular image, the seated Buddha, for example, what really struck me was that there, of course, is the story of how, when it was initially built and carved, but also there is a story of what it has survived over the centuries.
Yeah.
Don't worry, Malik, it's okay. It's fine. Don't worry, come. This is a sign, Buddha. Come, pick it up. Pick it up. Okay. So, I think that's very interesting because the amount of paint and lacquer that you can see scraping off of it.
Yes.
It also is a telling sign of what it has survived, whether it's elements of the weather, elements of being transported, being stolen,
Yes.
surviving wars and different sorts of calamities.
And Rishi, they have this tradition of putting the gold leaf on top as an offering. So the artifact has been embellished further and further by the devotees or people who love it. So it's quite interesting. So that it keeps as a live practice.
Yep. Desmond,
Yes.
you also had something that you wanted to share with us. When I say wanted to share with us, I mean you have been asked to share with us. I guess that's a more clear description of this.
Yeah.
Something from the exhibition.
Yes, and just like Aravind, I found two pieces, and in my case it was of the Madonna, Mother Mary in the Catholic tradition, and one is from the Qing dynasty from China, and the other one is from Goa in India. And I found it very interesting because my own training is in world religion, sociology, and creative writing, and I just like to look at how religion and art intersect and how different cultures interpret certain religious symbols, right? And it's just brilliant, how they cast their own cultural lens into these figurines. And I found some other Madonnas across the world, and I think we've got a slide for it. For example, there's one that's Chinese over there, one that's Japanese. There's the dominant one in the middle is by Michelangelo. It's very famous. And there's one, the Black Madonna, I think is from France, and the other one's from Spain. So you can see that all of them, have the working through of culture in their representation and their portrayal. Interestingly, I read a nice little anecdote by Charlotte Chao, who's I think senior manager here, and she talked about for one of the reliquary crosses, and she was talking about how she went to Rome and Jerusalem and really liked it there. And similarly, when I went there, it's just so vibrant, the history and the culture, and with other countries too, India and with the different religious narratives that each culture has.
It's interesting you mentioned this about the different countries and how they have their own versions or some similarities as well, similar visuals.
Yeah.
This is going to sound like it has nothing to do with anything, but do you miss travel?
Of course we do.
Yeah. Anyone watching right now, if you miss travel, write it down. We'll see whether we can do something about that. I'll explain why. Because when I got a chance to tour the exhibition alone, albeit, I felt like I was transported to multiple different countries, cities, worlds, time zones, and yes, it was very overwhelming, as history sometimes is, but it was also, in a weird way, comforting to be able to go somewhere else without having to leave your physical space. And I think sometimes stories have a way of doing that, the ability of doing that, of transporting you to a completely different time and a different zone. I think even Kamini was sharing with us about her object that kind of resonated with her, that has to do with some stories that you read as a young woman.
Yes, so the fabric that I sort of fell in love with and resonated with when I came for the tour was the ceremonial cloth that depicted a large battle scene from the epic, the Ramayana. And all of you watching, you must come and see this. I mean, the slide is only showing you a small portion of this fabric, which is probably as long as this panel here. And I collect artifacts and objects related to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. I have my own story cloth as well that I use when I perform. So I have one from Jogja in Indonesia. That's an antique piece of batik. So having seen this one,
May I just
the
ask,
connection.
for our audience,
Yeah.
when you say you have your own story cloth when you perform,
Yeah.
do you mind elaborating a little bit?
Okay, I think they have a photograph of me with my story cloth.
Yeah, because I
So-
think I've seen parts of it, but I don't
Correct.
know if everyone
yeah.
has.
So it's a long piece of fabric that has smaller segments of illustration from the parts of the epic or the parts of the story. So this story cloth that you see here, you have Jatayu, you have Rama, you have Sita, you have Hanuman. And so it's highly visual, standing in front of a story cloth and narrating segments of the story, especially to people who are not familiar with that culture, that heritage, or that narrative. So the museum brings alive artifacts in this way with the labeling, the captioning, and then if you do in-gallery storytelling or you do story tours and you have a storyteller to bring the entire exhibition to life, especially an epic like this, beautifully depicted with that ceremonial fabric.
You're absolutely right. I think it makes a huge difference if you've got a guide or a curator who understands and knows everything. I mean, is that correct, Shui? Because I mean, we were discussing about how I went alone and I scared myself unnecessarily. Through no fault of anybody else. I was just on my own, wandering through the exhibition, and I spooked myself out a little bit. I wish you were there with me to guide me through certain elements of it. We can't go back in time that much, Shui. Shui's like, well, I really wish I could, but Rishi, no, that's not what we can do. You've heard the panel share about their objects. Is there
Yes.
something that really spoke to you? I mean, being a part of the entire process from the start.
Right. Yeah, so one of my favorite objects in, the entire museum collection also went to the story. Actually, when I asked for various people to participate in the project, I gave them various keywords that I feel that, might speak to them more, especially in the past year. But I myself went for fun and joy. And I think, to me, the lacquer screen that I picked is I would say a little TV monitor that sort of transports you into the past. I mean, everything is static, but sort of, I think when you look at it, you sort of see different details sort of come to life and it kind of animates it. So it's actually depicting a gathering in 4th century China. even though this lacquer screen is made in the Qing dynasty, so many hundreds of years later. But it's such a sort of favorite story. It actually tells us about Wang Xizhi, so probably Malik will be very familiar. He's known as the sage of calligraphy as well. And on this particular day, he has actually invited his friends over essentially for a party by the river. So I think at that point, or last year, when we were feeling isolated and sort of cooped up at home, you know, wanting to escape or just to be with friends or out in, you know, in nature, and taking it in sort of really appealed to me. And this, of course, has a fun detail of wine cups floating down the river. And because the poets, the scholars who were there were asked to write poems, and if they felt like they were in a bit of a rut, they were supposed to take as a penalty, but maybe some were pretending they were in a rut, so you could pick up the cup of wine and drink it so that it would, you know, let your creative juices flow. So I think for us, the different objects spoke to us in different ways, and I think we find sort of comfort in objects, and I think part of it is, for me, what the museum can also do for people in such a time. So, I mean, you found it a little bit creepy when you were here on the quiet. I think some enjoy the kind of very tranquil moments they can enjoy in this space as well. So we just hope there was a bit of a sanctuary for people to come by.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, once I did feel that tranquility as well, calm and peace after I got over my inhibitions. And yeah, I would strongly recommend you guys check this out. It's running till the 28th of Feb.
Yeah, so very soon. You only have about 10 days.
10 days. Okay, lovely. For those of you who have just joined us, we are coming to you live from the Asian Civilizations Museum. This is a part of a quarterly series called Conversations, and we have with us some fantastic storytellers. I'm going to ask you folks something that's come through my pigeonhole feedback segment, and this is for everyone. Right? Feel free to jump in if you have something that you want to share. I'm going to ask you what you feel is the most memorable story that you have told. Not heard, but told. Wow. Deep question from Anonymous. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving that anonymous question. I mean, just to give you some context of where we are right here inside the ACM. Outside, we were joking about this earlier. We've got the ice cream uncle on his motorbike.
Yep.
Just waiting for us to come out and give him a lot of business. And this, I don't know why that just feels like a memorable story I've told in the past 1 hour. Like for me, that feels like the most interesting thing I've said or seen before the exhibition, of course. But is there something that any of you feel you want to jump in with? Something that really means a lot to you that you've shared, perhaps because of the recipient of the story, or because of the time it was told, because of what it meant to you, Kamini? There's something on your mind.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what Anonymous meant by memorable, whether it was memorable for the storyteller or memorable for the audience. So my response is more about my experience as a storyteller and what has been memorable for more than 2 decades from the audience's point of view. So there's a story that I tell that comes from South India called A Song and a Story. It's a tale about not telling stories and not singing songs, and how you keep them repressed inside of you. But in essence, a story and a song are meant to be told and meant to be sung and meant to be shared. And so one day they take revenge, right? So this has resonated with audiences not just in Singapore but at international festivals around the world. It's the story that consistently gets people writing to me and asking me more about the story, where to find it, do they have permission to tell it, how can they adapt it. So it's about resonance, right? That's what makes a story memorable.
That's beautiful, actually. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. Anyone else feels that? I mean, when you talk about storytelling, like Arvind, for you, is that something?
I think for me, you know, being in the Indian classical dance practice, we tell a lot of epical stories. But one day we attempted to tell the stories because I was inspired by a book that UNHCR published. It was a book of poems by refugee children from all over the world, and they were under 12 years old, and they could be from anywhere. And it was so powerful, the stories they were telling, and through their, you know, age lens that they could see. And we made that into a dance. So that was a memorable story because it was something happening now, the audience could understand it, but also it also intrigued the audience that, oh, a 1,000-year-old Indian classical dance form can tell the story that's happening right now
Wow.
in the world. So I think that is one of the most memorable stories. And everywhere we went and performed it, the audience normally would come and tell us, oh, we loved your music, we loved your movement, we loved your costumes, but they didn't say anything. They were all talking about what the children had to say. So the message got the attention, which is what we always want.
Yes.
You know? And so that's a story that I think was memorable. And now that we are coming out of COVID, I know that's the first story we're going to retell
Oh, that's
next
beautiful.
month. Yes.
Okay, lovely. I think that it's something again that has meaning in this time and day for you as the storytellers, and of course for your recipients as well, for the consumers of the story. Well, this is not something that has come in, but I am putting this out to all of you because we all come from different disciplines of storytelling. Do you feel like you consume stories of your own creative discipline better, or is it something that's very exciting to you to consume something of a story from another discipline? For example, as someone who's involved mostly in literary writing, for example, Desmond, is the world of visual storytelling in Indian classical dance something that intrigues you and you would like to consume more? Or do you feel like, you know what, I'd like to see what my peers are creating? So that's something that I always ask myself as a performer, as a consumer sometimes. What's your vibe on that?
Well, I think I wasn't supposed to be a writer. I was supposed to be an artist, you know, but you know, I did lit and that was it. So I love the poetry and the fiction and non-fiction, but I love film. So I love visual storytelling that way. So I'm a total movie buff, you know, indie films, the commercial blockbusters. And we learn a lot as writers because everything is very framed, the vignettes, the acts, you know, they're great. So definitely visual storytelling is.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Malik, what about you, man?
I mean, Chinese calligraphy, philosophy, stories, and all forms the basis of my creative pursuits, the bedrock of it. So yeah, I do have to consume a lot of Chinese literature.
And now you do speak and read.
I mean, I do, but to be frank, Chinese language is one of the hardest language. Even though I spend my time already in Taiwan and China to actually, Beijing to actually study the language, it still remains a uphill battle. But I'm very lucky because I've been supported by the Chinese community. To actually, I have friends who actually help me interpret, whether about Chinese philosophy and history. And that has actually helped me to actually come up with ideas. Like for example, how like people don't actually just throw away calligraphy artworks. I mean, the calligrapher don't just throw their artworks when they reject it, rather they burn it to show respect. So that's when I came with a friend who's a poet, and we recycled the paper of my rejects to make it into a new art. Yeah.
Oh, so you created something.
Yeah, from that philosophical background, and we create
That's
that kind of.
wonderful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, man. Thank you for sharing. No, it's great. It's great. I have the next question that I would like to actually lead in, because I think what Malik said is very telling. Bringing in some things that are emotional. I think stories are very related to emotion. We covered this a little bit earlier, but I'm just trying to understand, how do you sometimes channel your emotions into your work? Does that happen for you as well, Shui? I'm just curious because I guess it's the most different for you than everyone else. Everyone is, or maybe you are as well, a creative expressionist of some kind?
Yeah, I would say maybe of some kind, and definitely to some extent. I think we also tell the stories in a museum setting, and by that I mean that we sort of present it hopefully as an immersive experience as well, with the lighting, what objects that we choose to put together. I mean, people also make, other sort of more indirect connections really through how we present certain things, whether we put something up front or something at the side, you kind of view the object differently depending on how we present it.
You're making creative choices of how you would tell the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, usually I think because I come from a history background, you sort of say that you're supposed to take a more objective stand, but of course that is, I would say, a lie. You definitely, definitely, I think, I mean, just now when you asked about, what's a memorable story, I guess for me, working in the museum, I mean, I had the really great opportunity, well, now already about 11 years ago, to work with the Palace Museum, Beijing, and then I curated then an exhibition on the Kangxi Emperor. So it's, I guess, how to make a period of history, a historical personality become more accessible to people or of greater interest. So I guess that's where my kind of sort of storytelling, comes through. So I think if you like the sort of person or the period you're researching, naturally I think it also sort of translates into how you present, about the person and so forth. So, yeah, I guess I cannot express my emotions so expressively, like in some forms of the arts that's being that we are discussing here. But I think it still subtly comes through. Yep.
Definitely. No, I'm 100% in agreement. I think it's wonderfully articulated. I actually wanted to pick up on a point that you were mentioning, and this is maybe for Desmond a little bit. In terms of education, I think there's a lot of interesting overlap between education and storytelling. I had a lecturer in university who was teaching us communication history and theories, which is, anyone can attest to it. It's a very dry and difficult subject to teach 21-year-olds or 18-year-olds, even if you are extremely interested in the media. So, Dr. D, if you're watching, I don't know if you still log into my Facebook from time to time to see how your students are doing. And Dr. D has been, I mean, he was an amazing lecturer, because what he used to do was he would tell us stories about these major figures in history and humanize them. So you knew about Robert Park, not just because of what he had contributed to the media world, but you knew about how he used to play with his children, what his personal interests were, what he used to say, how he used to speak, how some people had weird medical issues growing up, and those things stuck with you. And the historical evidence or the information that you needed was kind of, by the way, he also invented this thing. And for me, that was a very interesting thing, because it is a way of making the content relevant to your subject matter, the people that you're trying to get it across to. And I have been rambling. So, any questions from you to me before I ask the next question? I want to break up the monotony a bit. I feel like hearing my voice too much.
I think, Rishi, I just wanted to tag on to what we just heard. As a performing artist, we are used to music and movement and costumes and all, but when I come to the museum and when you see an object, it's very intriguing that it's static, right? I mean, of course there's some description, but the static piece actually starts to tell a lot of stories about where it came from, what has happened to it before it arrived here, and why is this the chosen piece standing in front of you, and the story it has to tell, and the stories people have told it. I mean, it's amazing that how, when it's curated properly, it actually tells your story. So
I'm in 100% agreement with that. It almost feels like the piece is, and you hear this a lot, is speaking to you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've always heard this being said, but when you actually come to an exhibition like this that works, you're right, it tells you something. It's very interesting. Sorry, yes, you had a point to add on. Kamini?
I think, museum-based storytelling, artifact-based storytelling, site-specific storytelling is sequential. So the experience starts from the moment you step into the environment. You come up the wooden stairs, you look at the high ceilings, you go into this dimly lit exhibition, and tagging on to what Arvind mentioned, everything has a narrative that's a backstory, right? Because everything here is from the past. And just like the oral tradition, I am always retelling something. I'm not inventing contemporary or new fiction. And so there's a backstory, and then we are here in the present engaging with this artifact that is from the past. And then when we go back and we talk about this and we share about this, exactly what we're doing, pushing it into the future.
Yep.
So this cycle, that's constant. It's like a flow of honoring the past, being present in the present, and continuing the narrative into the future. So that's what museum storytelling or gallery or institutional storytelling is about.
That's wonderful. And in a way, even if, like you say, we try to be as objective as possible, inevitably your story is now linked to that of what you've been curating or you've experienced in the museum. Like, I mean, 15 years down the road, when I tell children, and I'm going to tell children, my story of visiting Faith, Love, Beauty, and Hope, I mean, it's going to be, colored with my own, my own memories of it, and this wonderful memory of sharing it all with all of you here. So it's beautiful, actually. This next part actually is about how you mentioned COVID-19 in the past year, where a lot of rules were rewritten, a lot of things changed for a lot of people around the world. I dare say, as an artist myself, my art helped me cope and deal. How did your craft or your art, Malik, for example, help you cope with this new world we've been living in?
Well, I'm actually quite. When COVID-19 happened, I couldn't meet my mentor as much. But I'm kind of lucky because when I was spending time in Taiwan and Beijing, I still WhatsApp my teacher to ask him questions and all that. So the technology link was already there. So even though I do know some of my other classmates had problems because they can't meet him, but in a way, when it comes to that transmission of knowledge from my mentor, it wasn't really affected. But I mean, having time alone, there was the lockdown and all that. I have time with my books. I have time to actually think about how do I make, deep questions like how do I make Chinese calligraphy more Malik? Or rather, like, how do
Did you just say, okay, we found a tagline for today's discussion. How do I make Chinese calligraphy more Malik? It's the line of the century. Oh, I love that. I think that deserves a round of applause. Very good, Malik. That is the COVID-19 introspective line of the century. So beautifully put. That's very interesting though. Like you said, you had already established some form of communication with your mentor, and perhaps the genre gave you time to reflect and introspect, to make it more Malik, like you said.
But at the same time, while I'll make it more Malik, I have to have that linkage with my mentor, because you don't want to create something that is
too Malik,
and you want to be respectful of the culture that you are actually doing. So when I do something and I go like, Mr. Yong, is this okay? Then he's like, okay, this part, and we discuss philosophy, we discuss whether it's, he's been quite open to the odd things I've been doing. So so far I've been getting the green light. But if I do something that is what he deems not so right, that's when it's very important for him to step in. Hey, no, Malik, maybe you should look at it from another perspective or all that.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's great. Kamini, do you miss human connection? Because I can imagine that your craft involves being in person, in physical space with human beings.
Tremendously. I think last year that's what I craved the most. But, art and artists have always been challenged throughout history. This is not the first challenge that we are encountering. And oral tradition has survived this because it's the most portable. You just need the voice, yourself, and someone somewhere. So if they're not here with me in an intimate space, I use the digital space. You embrace all the things that you have, all the tools and methods at your disposal. So we continue to connect with audiences last year, especially families who were struggling, juggling working from home and learning from home. And so we were able to put out a lot of free resources, high quality, high resolution productions that are still available on our channels, the Storytelling Center Limited. And families were really thankful and grateful for this because it's wholesome, it allows the parents to continue with their work and children to engage. And coming back to that question that you asked about emotional connection to what we do as artists and to narratives and to stories, looking through the camera and not knowing who's there on the other side is a skill that all of us had to learn.
Yes.
And eye contact is so important for a storyteller, for all of us, right? And so that's something that, I began to investigate and experiment like Malik. How much, how little, how do you know what's happening on the other side?
Yep.
So 1 year later, I've come to a very good place where I'm comfortable with myself and happier with where we all are as a team, as storytellers, navigating this little lens that's looking at you and not knowing how your eye contact translates on the other side.
Yep. You're right, everyone. I would say that we've all had to unlock skills that we never knew we had and work on those. Excellent, thank you. I want to take some questions from our audience because we've got some good questions right here. I'm going to take one from May. May, thank you so much for submitting this question. Your question is, starts with a statement for everyone here. Stories and the arts have great influence in preserving history, creating culture, and inspiring hope. How can we use stories and the arts in creating values and a sense of oneness with humanity? I guess that's the question. How can we use stories to create values and a sense of oneness with humanity? Wow. Suddenly, this has become suddenly meaningful. If it wasn't already, may you have shoved us into the next level of meta meaning right here. If anybody wants to jump in for that.
Scary question.
I think, Rishi, it's a very good question, and I think it's something that we need to learn now, because in the Instagram world, it's all about me, and Facebook doesn't have that so badly, but Instagram has it, and so does many other platforms.
Yes.
So one gets, as an artist, gets used to becoming self-centered, and who are we telling the story to has to become an important question. And I think all art forms, whether it's visual, storytelling, film, is all about that experience of the art maker and the audience, going in that journey together. So you watch a show, you go there, you read a book, you are in that journey with the author. And that is, I think, the most important thing. And with that way, the art already has a way of connecting oneness with the people. And your reader could be from any background, any race, any country, anything. And they all go through the same, experience. That, I think, is very important. And sometimes I feel we kind of lose it because some of these, today's platforms shuts that out from us.
Yep.
And but I think the audience who are watching you or reading your book are wanting that experience, and I think that's very important.
That's interesting. The sense of, for the lack of a better word, selflessness of a creator that perhaps shares the balance of responsibility between creator and recipient to be able to create the oneness. That is our combined answer for you. Is that fair, team? Are we okay with that?
Yes.
Shri, has that been your experience as well? Because I think, again, from a little bit of a different world from all of us, has that been you for the past year?
Sort of just looking at the question maybe from the other side of it would be that I think like the objects that we have at the museum, and I think just putting this exhibition together was interesting because I think I took a back seat and then I sort of gave an open call for anyone to really select something that resonated. So I really didn't know what people were going to select, and I think that was also the fun in reading about what my colleagues, were thinking about certain objects. I mean, obviously they were looking at it in a different lens from, myself as well. I mean, sometimes similar stories resonated, but I think this is that sort of very human side of it, and and then it's always interesting when maybe someone selects something maybe from a different culture, but yet they still see something in it that resonates with them, whether it's just, it being beautiful or, like someone selecting the mountain. I mean, they see something very immutable or strength in, in certain things. So I think just with art, or any good art, it would transcend boundaries of time, gender, ethnicity. And again, I think this is sort of harkening back to what was shared earlier as well, was that yeah, there's this timeless quality, I think, about art that would just combine us from the past to the present, and hopefully, these same values would be picked up as well in the
Lovely.
future.
Thank you, Shui. I'm a bit conscious of time because we do have to let people get back to pretending to work for the last couple hours of the work day. Desmond, do you feel like you as a storyteller have a responsibility to bring some form of emotion, positive emotion, I think, in tough times?
Yeah, asking a post-structuralist. No, that's yeah, I think that every artist evolves in their own ideas of what ethical or moral responsibility they have vis-a-vis their craft and art, right? For me, with this recent year, surprisingly, a lot of institutions have asked for workshops that deal with healing. And so I love that so much, It's not something that I've done a lot in the past, and then I've given a lot of it, and I realized that people have this real deep need for this oneness, this wholeness, right? Within yourself, let's not even talk about with other people yet. Let's just heal ourselves first, and then open up that conversation with other people. It's a beautiful space. We're having an anthology on healing coming out in the second half of the year. Also, dealing with tropes like death and grief, trauma, personal spirituality. I've learned so much from all these workshop participants when they've shared their stories, and we all learn from each other through that conversation. And that's how art can help, I think. And if there's any ethical responsibility, probably that's the one small gift I hope to gift to these small spaces.
I think in a lot of ways, no matter what we all say, there is a part of us that wants to bring some form of emotion to our viewers or consumers of the work that we do. Like Apsara's Arts has some live shows coming up even, Arvind, you were saying. Is that something you're excited about, looking forward to, being able to bring some joy, hopefully, to your audiences?
Yeah, I think, connecting with the audience is what we exist, So even though, and I agree with Kamini, we all learned different skills to, look at the camera lens, but I think ultimately seeing people, seeing faces, feeling the emotions together is very, very important, And we are really looking forward to be doing that. And of course, it's been a long time you hear a pair of hands clapping.
Yes.
Because on the Zoom you don't hear anything, you don't hear anything. So I think, that's something what every art maker, lives on, I would say. So I think this is important. And, during the COVID times, yes, I would say the world was very resilient, right? So everybody learned technology, everybody got to know what to do with their webcam or whatever. So we all got interested. And for us, what happened, Rishi, was we realized that as an arts fraternity, as performers, we are all jet-setting and going to concert tours and our own schedules. But during COVID, the whole world came to a standstill, which is very unprecedented, because normally a particular region will have a problem. Certainly. So we were able to connect with our peers across the world and learn together. So we got on together on webinars, and we shared and we tried to learn together. And that was the way I think we were healing, because we were healing by trying to better ourselves and also hear from our peers, and which was a rare opportunity of many months that the world gave us. Okay, now all just rest and do something different with your life. So I think that was a blessing in a way. That's
beautiful that you've shared a very positive outcome. I think that's what we all. I shouldn't say should, but it's something we all aspire towards. So thank you for sharing the very positive view at the end of it. Shui, this exhibition that we're talking about, faith, beauty, love, and hope. I guess for you first, how can we, in such unprecedented times we were talking about, how can we still encourage everyone around us to continue looking at the positives around us, looking at the faith, the beauty, the love, the hope? What's your vibe on that?
I think, all these values, they are probably inherent within us, and it's actually all around us. I think it's just important to be grateful, or just to be mindful, and then just take pause, and then for now look outside the trees. I can't see the ice cream uncle, but I can imagine he's beyond, and so forth. Just a little bit of imagination, and I think just to remind ourselves that despite everything that's going on, yeah, whatever little thing you can be grateful or thankful for, yeah, that's, I think, enough.
That's beautiful. Just to say that we are on the second level, if we could see the ice cream uncle, it would be quite scary, the skills he would have. Kamini, you want to add to our some of the closing comments here?
I think the most important message that I'd like to share about my experience with COVID, it's still ongoing, right, the pandemic, is to look for similarities within all the differences that surround us. So whether you're walking in a museum, experiencing something in an exhibition or gallery that's unusual to you, or if you're, observing calligraphy, reading poetry, watching dance, listening to a story, there will always be things that are different, culturally, traditionally, language. But instead of isolating them and ignoring them, be curious and find the common narrative, the thread that binds everything together. Even if you can find one thing that you resonate or you associate or affiliate with, that will bring this question about oneness and humanity, right? This overall healing and overall calming down and helping each other. That's what will foster that.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. Malik, any closing thoughts, my friend? You want to make anything else more Malik? Other than just
being
Chinese calligraphy?
someone who actually practice cross culture, putting myself in an unfamiliar situation is very normal for me. And this COVID is it's something very new, I can say that. Yeah. So from my experience, whenever you like doing Chinese calligraphy as a Malay back then, you have to rely on the community to help you. So I think that's the advice that I would give people, that to get your hope, to encourage each other. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yep.
It's beautifully put. Thank you. It's amazing. Wow. Desmond, anything to add before we wrap things up? No? You okay?
Yeah, just have faith, love beauty, have hope. It's all there.
Okay,
It's all
good.
there.
The writing is on the wall, as they say.
Yes, literally now.
Thank you very much, all of you. Like we said, we haven't heard the sound of applause for a long time. I think you can give yourself a round of applause. It's pretty good. This is good. Wonderful session, very positive. I do have to wrap things up right now, but once again, those of you who have tuned in, thank you very much for joining us right here. This was our Conversations series brought to you live from the Asian Civilizations Museum. The exhibition that we were speaking about, Faith, Beauty, Love and Hope, continues till the 28th of February. Highly recommended by all of our panel right here, a comedian included. So don't worry, please come, whomever you are, from whatever walk of life. There is something we would like to invite you to help us do right now. We want to continuously make this session more exciting, more engaging, and hopefully give you all more of what you would like to see. So there is a feedback form QR code that's going to appear on your screens right now. If you could do us a favor, scan that and tell us a little bit about how you felt about the sessions here. And of course, if you've got any more things that you want to see in the future, let us know as well. Without further ado, I think we got everything we need. Yeah. Once again, thank you to our entire wonderful panel. Thank you, Shui, Arvind, Desmond, Kamini, and Malik. Real pleasure. Have a wonderful weekend. Yep. Go back to your last hour of work, everybody. And before we go, let's just put on our masks again, just to remind you all the filming was done with the safe distancing measures in place. Thank you. Have a good weekend. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Pleasure.